Yes Music Podcast, episode 213, an interview with Steve Howe on Yes in 2016 and beyond.
This is John Davison, and you're listening to Yes Music Podcast.
Hi, this is Jeff Downs, and you're listening to Yes Music Podcast.
Hi, this is Steve Howe, and you're listening to me on the Yes Music Podcast. Have a good time. Listen. Bye.
Hi, this is John Anderson. You're listening to the Yes Music Podcast.
Welcome to episode 213 of the Yes Music Podcast, one fan's exploration of the world's greatest progressive rock band. I'm your host, Kevin Mulrine. Please remember how you can get involved with the podcast yourself via the various different ways on the site, yesmusicpodcast.com. I've recorded episodes of the YMP in various different places over the years. You can probably hear from this recording that this is somewhat of an unusual place as well. It's actually a hotel room in Brighton on the south coast of the UK. So please excuse the computer noises you can probably hear. I'm just talking straight into my digital recorder with a pair of headphones on. So this week has been an amazing one for the YMP after the very successful and well-received conversation with Mark Anthony Kaye last week, all about magnification. By now you'll know who the special guest is this week, but before we get into that, here's a quick roundup of what else has been going on. Mark Anthony Kaye was kind enough to send me for my birthday the new album by Billy Sherwood called Citizen. That's an amazing collection with a stellar cast of prog artists, and I'll be getting on to talking about that soon. I also received late for my birthday a CD which looks from the front cover like it's something to do with The Ladder, or in fact the Open Your Eyes tour, according to Brian Neeson. Thank you, Brian. But in fact, it is the BBC sessions on the CD itself. On Facebook, you may have seen the 6-year-old who plays South Side of the Sky on the piano. That's definitely worth a look. Uncle Preston Frazier has done another Something Else review. This time it's 5% for nothing. And there's a new Yes book on the way by Martin Popoff. You can pre-order it now. It's called, interestingly, Time and a Word, The Yes Story, which is awfully close to John Kirkham's, of course. Ben Craven's album launch is going to be in Brisbane on the 8th of April, if you can possibly get to that, to celebrate Last Chance to Hear. And I also received very kindly from John Doyle an amazing Yes cover CD by Sax Life. It's called Sax Life Plays Yes, and Jameson Smeltz is the artist who put it all together. I contacted him via Facebook and thanked him for that amazing album, and also, of course, thanks to John Doyle. Also this week, we're back again to review from Mark Anthony Kaye, and he's decided to review Steve Howe's The Steve Howe Album, as he says, in order to create a sort of harmony with this week's episode. Mark says, "This week I let faith decide my selection as I blindly grabbed the first record I touched in my collection. Much to my surprise, it was Steve Howe's The Steve Howe Album. Now, some of you might recall me being a little hard on Steve with the last album of his that I reviewed, so will it recur again? Let's find out. But first the facts. The Steve Howe album was released on November 1979 in the UK and January 1980 in the US. It was recorded in London, England and released on Atlantic Records. Enough about the facts. I know what you're thinking. How is the album? Well, to be honest, I was pleasantly surprised. I was expecting another album filled with Steve's weak singing, but instead I got a well-crafted and thought-out album. In fact, I'll go one step further. This album is a perfect example of what Steve is great at. After all, he isn't only a rock and roll guitar player. Far from it. His talent dips into bluegrass, country, jazz and classical, all of which are represented on this record. For example, the opening track, Penance, is a rocking number featuring the distinctive sound of his Fender Telecaster. Cactus Boogie is a straight-up bluegrass number which showcases his tremendous slide guitar playing. On the other end of the spectrum, Surface Tension and Double Rondo displays his love of classical music and shows that he might well be one of the greatest classical guitar players of all time. And if those two songs don't convince you, then the last song, Concerto in D, Second Movement by Vivaldi, certainly will. If Vivaldi was alive today, I'm sure he would be pleased by Steve's performance. It has feel and passion. The other smart move Steve made on this album was only singing one song, and even that was painful to sit through, but I'll overlook it, as the rest of the album is so great. Once again, Bill Bruford, Alan White and Patrick Moraz guest on a few songs, and while their performances were terrific, I feel like they weren't as critical this time in making this album great. So in closing, I had a great time listening to this album, and I have a feeling that if you like Yes music and Steve guitar playing, then you'll love this album too. 8.5 out of 10. So thank you very much indeed, Mark, for that review. If you have a copy of that, do get it out and take a listen. Tim Stannard also got in touch this week about a Yes-related item. He says, I mentioned in a comment on the YMP blog that I'd received Bill Bruford, the autobiography, as a Christmas present, and having just finished reading it, I thought I'd put my thoughts in writing. I'm not sure it belongs on the YMP blog pages, but I thought you might be interested. I certainly recommend you read the book if you get a chance. First things first, this is a great read. It is well written at a level that assumes a certain amount of education and intelligence on part of the reader. A smattering of musical knowledge doesn't go amiss either, although this isn't by no means essential to the enjoyment of the book. It follows a loosely chronological order, loose in the sense of using what happened next as an opportunity to explore a particular subject at different stages of the author's career. 18 of the 19 chapters are titled in the form of a question Bill Bruford claims to have been asked regularly. I say claims, as with titles like What Do You Call a Guy Who Hangs Around with Musicians, I assume some of this is a firmly tongue-in-cheek. However, rather than simply answering the question, each chapter uses it as a cue to discuss a number of topics. Life on the road is covered in some detail, but this isn't the normal rock and roll fun and games we might get with a Led Zeppelin bio, or even the how we all threw our toys out of the pram when there wasn't any vegetarian food, or how we spent our evening amongst the joss sticks reading tantric scriptures that we might expect from a Yes biography. This is much more mundane, the pressures of getting from A to B, the tedium of living in hotels and on planes, having to tear oneself away from the family, being cooped up with the same band members for weeks on end, and how to avoid it. This might be potentially dull matter, but Bruford's honest intelligence and often humorous writing makes this a fascinating insight. The book is even more insightful when it comes to understanding Bill Bruford, the musician. As you read the book, not only do Bruford's apparently questionable decisions, e.g. leaving Yes, make perfect sense, they seem to be the only decisions he could possibly have taken at the time. The third element that the book deals with is that of contemporary music, the differences between what he calls programmed music, music written, arranged and produced in someone's home studio, with a minimum of actual musicians, singers playing in real time, and playing with other trained and experienced musicians, creating a true improvisation, a piece of music that is just in the present. The final key element of the book deals with the music business. Whilst we're all familiar with stories of how managers and agents ripped off bands, Bruford discusses how much work there is in managing an act, having become self-employed. I won't begin to list all the chores necessary, including constant networking and updates on social media, and bear in mind this was written in 2009, to work as a freelancer or even more so as a band leader, but it is clear that little, if any, time is left for actual music. Bruford is only interested in moving drumming forward. Sadly, there are very few environments that allow him or anyone to do this. It's perhaps inevitable that as music becomes more sophisticated, there are fewer people able to understand it, and thus audiences shrink. Whilst Bruford is clearly in no doubt as to his own abilities, he constantly refers to other drummers whom he considers his technical and musical superiors. His frustration at the increased difficulty he has in finding new ideas is tangible, and again his decision to retire from playing seems totally logical. The final chapter is perhaps the weakest as it covers this topic in detail, and felt rather repetitive to me. It read like someone trying not to be bitter, or perhaps someone trying to convince himself that his achievements have indeed been worthwhile. A quote from the final chapter. Truth be told, I haven't really enjoyed my music making for a while, even from my position of untold riches. It is given to some to enjoy this activity, the rest of us just keep our noses down and get on with it. But why should bios and auto-bios of our heroes end on a high? This perhaps more than anything shows what an honest book this is. It's only hearsay, I know, but a musician friend of a friend of mine and his wife are social friends with Bill Bruford and his wife, and several years on, he's still perfectly content to have retired from active service. Thanks, Bill, for a great read. Tim got back to me later saying, something I neglected to mention is that he's very critical of Chris Squire's renowned lateness, and considers keeping other musicians waiting is the worst insult that can possibly be paid. He cites this as a significant factor in his decision to quit Yes. So thank you, Tim. That's really fascinating review of the book, which I've got on order and I'm going to receive very soon myself. So on now to the Steve Howe interview. One of the main things which came across to me in speaking to Steve was his infectious love for the music he has been involved in creating. In the end, he is just like us all, a true Yes fan. Here's how it went. So it's wonderful to be able to speak to guitar legend and Yes member over so many decades, Steve Howe. Hello, Steve.
Hello there, Kevin.
So, yes, they're soon to start their 2016 UK and European tour and have now played a number of concerts without Chris Squire. How has Billy Sherwood settled in, do you think? And how has Chris's absence changed the live situation?
Well, Billy settled in really well because he was already set up to do this, hoping that Chris was recuperating. But as it happened, that isn't how it panned out. So we've done about 30 shows with Billy, and he's been very strong right from the word go. He was felt very capable and strong about doing it, and so he's been very nice to watch and see him develop the show in his own way. And he doesn't imitate. He plays the same notes. He achieves many of the same tones that Chris gets through programming, like I use, so that he's presenting a good show. But there again, he's not, trying to do the kind of things Chris did, as far as performance. He's a different performer, he's a different person, and he's taking his music gradually and just nice and steady. I mean, obviously, in regard to what we've lost, obviously, we've lost a highly valued. Yes, I mean, I can't say it like that, Chris has been such a great part of Yes, but also one's got to say, well, as unfortunate as it is, and it is very unfortunate, we've got to learn to live without Chris, and there's things we're going to miss, but in the most part, I think because we've understood, when Chris was alive, that he could foresee the group going on without him, that in fact we're doing something, that he would imagine we would do, Yeah. So, but of course, he was a larger than life sort of person, and sort of that also meant he was louder than most people in many ways. He had a good voice, had a great voice. He did play very loud on stage, and this did create many years of the whole time it created a sort of a new challenge that you had to kind of do it. So basically, that was quite an exception Chris always made about his volume. But somehow we worked through it. The question was somehow. What was the somehow? But somehow we worked through it. And also, of course, he was a bit more flamboyant. He was flamboyant and liked to move about, groove about and everything. And, that was part of his charm. So, of course, we're not going to have that as much as we don't have Peter Banks, or we don't have living members at the moment in the band who also add a certain something. And that's the whole thing about chemistry in a band. It is hard to find that. And we were, very lucky while Chris was alive, to sort of settle on the idea and find that Billy was a logical choice.
Yes, absolutely. And you mentioned the vocals there as well, the backing vocals, and Billy seems to have fitted into that role as well extremely well, and his voice seems to blend very well with the rest of the choir.
Well, we did not want to have a separate vocalist who only did the harmonies, so Billy was able. I mean, Billy saw that as his job. He didn't see it as something over the top or too much to ask. That was what he was able to practice at home. And that essence of learning things at home started very much when we became more conscious of it. At least I did when I worked with Tony Levin, because he would show up knowing everything. And I'd say, let's practice this song. He says, I do know that one. Said, oh, great, you already learnt it. Oh, yeah. So the concept of learning at home, we all did a bit of it, but we certainly do more of it now that we consider the original versions to be the kind of gospel, according to Yes. It's like, well, we need to know something about this song. What do we know about this song? This is the way it was recorded. So we start at that point and move forward, the key, the tempo, the textures in the music. And as you said, Billy's voice is working great with John's. And I had, I only sing the low part. And, that's fine. I can add a little, depth or warmth to it. But most of the time, I'm very happy that those two guys are working well together.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've mentioned the music itself. You're going to be playing two iconic albums on tour, Fragile and Drama. Do you prefer playing whole albums, which you've done quite a bit of lately?
Well, I do. Because of so many years, besides the Topographic tour itself, which was similar to this in that we played the whole of Topographic Ocean initially. And I think we started with Close to the Edge, which is quite an exercise. Yes. So we forgot about it all that time, 40 years of not doing that. And then we picked it up again in 2012, 2013 when we started doing 3 albums, So basically, I mean, that was that felt like an experiment, one that I definitely promoted and kept saying, we should do this, we should do it. Other bands are doing it, we're an album band, why don't we do this?
Yeah.
So when it got everybody's thumbs up and we started doing it, there were aspects of it which we didn't know were going to be difficult, which are fairly irrelevant. But the main thing was the way that we kind of approached the album and got to the end. When you start the first song, you kind of see that the light at the end of the tunnel is a long way away. It's a long way away. But it is a whole mood, captures a whole period of time in our minds. And certainly those songs are linked, forever linked, going as we did on the Yes album, from, say, Starship to I've Seen the Good People. Although Starship became an encore, when we get it as an album, we could feel that. We could feel that move. And it was really, really exciting to have such peaks in an album as Starship Trooper, So loved the album concept, particularly going for the one. That's why when we chose that's a very delicate and masterful album, because not only does it rock very solidly in the shape of Parallels and going for the one, but it also spaces out considerably, with your Turn of the Century and Wondrous Stories, and then you've got Awaken as just sort of staple, sort of huge monster piece with every chord in the book in it, and everything thrown at it, which we used to do on our big 20-minute pieces. It was gung ho, let's put the orchestra in here. Let's have the church organs. Let's have the bells. Let's have everything, because we needed all that colour to play for that long on one song. Well, when we do an album, we've got those individual colours of the songs, which is great.
Absolutely. Well, going back to Drama, I absolutely love Drama. It's one of my favourite albums. Is it as fun to play live as it looks? It always struck me as a great fun piece of music.
I was so shocked. I mean, I think Tempest Fugit was the first thing to get brought in, and I like that. It's a nice piece. I really have a lot of fun and got some of my musical bits in it I really love. But then when we went, okay, let's do Machine Messiah, I thought, well, I mean, here's the one. What's this going to be like all that time? And I found it impossible not to go quite crazy. It's not really like me, but my knees got weak, and I used to lean against the microphone occasionally, stand, because there's something about playing some of that music which is, you see, the things I do on stage are usually like uncontrollable. They're not processed and they're not choreographed in the sense I will do them every night. So when these moments would happen where my knees would go a bit weak and I'd sort of fall about a little bit, it was no put on. It was just a product of the music,
Yeah.
And I think I did some fairly strange things, which only endorses the fact that this is not supposed to look good. It's just supposed to be an outlet for me to physically express this. But Machine Messiah is so exciting to play, because I love a song with those big highs and lows. When you got Machine in the midst and end of a song that's mainly about thrashing and bashing and charging about with these big tunes, and then near the end, one of my all-time favourite Yes themes is I don't know what we'd call it really, but it's near the end section. It starts in E flat and it goes do da do 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 do. Well, I played it about 2 times earlier in a much less important kind of way, but when it gets to this final time, it's like, right, this is it, and it's twice as long as the other themes. So a bit like Into the Lens also has this steel theme that I play 3 times in it, funny enough, and each time it's different. It's blowing my mind trying to learn 3 versions of the same tune.
Yes.
But, I'll get there. I'll get somewhere near it. But going back to Machine Messiah, just it's mouthwatering because of the dramatic sense of it. It's so light at times that it's hardly anything at all. And then it's everybody's throwing stuff at the fan.
Absolutely. Well, it must also be a joy to have Jeff Downes in the band, the original creator of those keyboard lines.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I'm looking forward to... Funny enough, the song that seemed a bit light at the time has become quite deep, because what Trevor brought into play in Run to the Light, which is one of Chris's kind of like dancey sort of songs, and like suddenly it's, when he sings, da 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 da, there's some great writing in there. Interplay between the guitar and voice, I think, is really unique because, I'm very bluesy, but also kind of metally as well, which is quite unusual. Blisteringly committed to these lines that intersperse Trevor's mournful almost sadness, a bit like when we in Fly From Here. When he's talking about down at the airport,
yes.
at the airport, Elstree, and all that, it's kind of like there's a kind of remoteness about, and this is what I love about particularly working with other British musicians, is that we kind of relate to these stories. You don't exactly have to say much, but you can tell that there's something about it, that we connect with the land, with the places, with our friends, with the accents, with the look of people, in different areas. You come down the west or you go up to the north, up to Scotland. You see different flavours of people. We know this, and this comes through in our music, as much as it does with Benjamin Britten. It comes through because we're land lovers.
Yes, absolutely. So are there any plans to try out any other complete albums in future?
Well, I won't be shy to say that there's one we've got to eventually play. Well, we do actually, but I can't really give it away. If you don't know what it is, I'm not going to give it away. But eventually, in our lifetime, we will have to play Relaya.
Yes.
Gates of Delirium is highly complex, but fortunately, now Alan and I played that in the last 15 years.
Yes.
A few times. We played it in 2000, 2003 and 2004, I think. And it was fairly scary then. But the idea of Relaya would be to obviously bring the two songs that haven't been played since 1975.
Yeah.
That one, I think Relaya was. That's to Be Over, which has been an all-time favourite of mine, and also Sound Chaser, which is like, this is the scare your pants off piece.
Yes.
It's like lots of lovely diminished chords, which I'm fairly obsessed with, but there's lots of, like holding back and then rushing forwards. So that would be a very eclectic thing to do. We'd need a while to get ready to play that one. But I also think that, we talked about other records, and I even said Time in a Word one day. For me, Time in a Word, although it's off the mark with America, really, because they really don't know that record. Yes, and Time in a Word, people will say, not now because of our history, but they don't know those albums hardly at all. I think it's a great shame because it's a wonderful album. I think that there's other sorts of set lists we mustn't ignore.
Yeah.
So in other words, I'm saying, I like playing albums and things, but it's not the only game in town, and there's other sets that I've invented in my mind and circulated that tell a different story. And I think that we've got to be careful not just to tell the same story, or here's another album. I think we could intersperse that, like we did with last summer. That was a very kind of friendly, come-on set, a couple of new songs. It was all give. It was bubbly, and it wasn't so kind of dramatic. Although we did some lovely songs in it. So albums aren't the old. There's other great set lists which would really rivet an audience. In different ways, and that intrigues me.
Absolutely. And I was talking to someone last night about Magnification, and of course it's 15 years this year since Magnification, and some of those tracks surely could do with an airing now.
Yeah, I revisit the albums. I quite like East of Ascension studio tracks. Now,
yes, yeah.
That's going back to the mid-90s, and that's quite a nice era. And when we went Open Your Eyes, The Ladder, now when we got to The Ladder, I wondered where we could go after that, because Bruce Fairbairn actually reminded us, re-taught us, if you like. There's not really a word called re-taught us, but he re-educated us in how you make a record. We'd really lost the plot. The freedom we'd been allowed was just too much, and Bruce came along and said, and then we threw that all down the drain when we did Magnification. It was like, okay, well, let's just forget everything we've just been reminded and do this completely wrong, So we went around it in the most bizarre way that was undid all the wonderful and admirable lessons that Bruce Fairbairn had just taught us. Typical, yes. You never really go in the tried and tested way.
No.
We tend to try out experiments, and Magnification was a heck of an experiment. I know I had to pick a track. I did manage to pick a track. I found it a little difficult with those albums I mentioned, Open Your Eyes onwards, to pick tracks I was fully committed to now, Of course, I've got enjoyment for them, and I can have a bit of a laugh, and I know what the story on this song was. And some of the moods are great, but as far as, certainly as an album, I don't think so. you know.
Right.
Now, an album is got to have... Well, we tried. Obviously, the albums do have a consistency. Like Open Your Eyes is most probably too consistent. Or The Ladder is consistent in its order, but because Bruce only mixed 9 voices, it's the only track that actually went the whole Bruce Fairbairn way.
Right.
And I absolutely worship that track. I put it on and I just worship Bruce because he used to call me Swami. That's not why I worship him. But why I worship him, because, as I say, beside the re-education, you know, a producer does have to have his act together. You know, it's no good, you know, having a producer not having his act together. And he was the epitome of act together. And that creates respect from the band. And that means that a producer that's the only time a producer can do what he's there to do. He's only got the full respect, and that's what the Beatles had for George Martin. You know, and it goes on all the way from there. When you've got the right respect, the producer can exercise the difficult things he has to say, like, I don't like that. That sounds pretty difficult, you know, to say to a successful band, I don't like that. That's not very good. I think you should do it again. You know, whatever one of those statements had to come out. But on that occasion, you know, there was nobody to speak. But you singled it out. Maybe you got a certain kick out of it. It certainly was at another adventure we had with, you know, which was the first time since Time and a Word, the one I revere so much, that had orchestra too. Although they were very tucked in with the band, you never had a sense they were dominating the Yes on Time and a Word. But so I mean, you know, sometimes you can inadvertently ask a question that's kind of hard to answer. Yeah, there is a track. There is one track I picked out that I would single out. I thought it was going to be Spirit of Survival, but it actually turned out not to be. I thought it might be In the Presence, but it's not. And it's another track, but I honestly can't remember what it is.
Okay. Well, not to worry. I mean, you talked about producers there and producing. Are there any plans to go back into the studio at some point?
Well, there are no plans, no. We don't have plans to do that. We have offers. We have other people want us to do it. You know, we're always being encouraged, if you like. But in fact, when a band is ready to make a record, and we weren't necessarily when we made Heaven and Earth, when a band is ready to make a record, it knows, and it has the audacity, to have the confidence to know that it's doing something really great, and I think that's a calling that I'm prepared to wait for. But as members collaborate a little and they might get an idea, they like this song, or, oh, that's quite a nice song, that's quite a nice new song. But, I mean, when you look at an album, it should be about 30 to 40 to 50 minutes long. So you need a few songs, you know, and the standard and the excellence that they should be at if you're going to honour the things that we have done before. Even Keys to Ascension, the most recent album that I consider fairly thoroughbred in the studio recordings, even though it was a bit of a hodgepodge. We recorded some of it in a bank. I mean, there was no tillers and there wasn't any money in the bank. But it was actually a building that was a bank.
Right.
And we made a lot of it in that building. But I think there was a hunger there that I liked, and certainly the writing. Some of it, you know, unfortunately, we did eventually agree to re-record quite a lot of that music that was at a demo stage at one time that I hadn't had much hand in. And I said, well, if you go ahead with that, I mean, I might as well not be here, you know. But if we do it again, then we can incorporate. And that's what we did. We did do it again. So it was properly demoed. That's why it was good, actually. It was properly demoed. And then it was re-recorded. Then it was properly recorded. So, and of course, Billy helped us a lot. Billy Sherwood helped us a lot with that record. He wasn't in the band, but he was the engineer, you know. So, but I do find that the other records, I want to like them. I like parts of them. And then I feel, where were we going here? What were we thinking? But, you know, the digital was changing things a lot, as it did with my other band, GTR, you know. It changed that. That was a surprising record. It sounded like this, you know. It was the digital, you know, sounds that were also not hard to learn, but you know, hard to get in sync with.
Brilliant. Okay, listen, thank you so much for giving up your time to speak to me this afternoon. I can't wait for the tour. I'll be in the front row in Birmingham. I'll give you a wave. And thanks so much for your time.
All right, Kevin, it's been nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
I've heard all Yes Music podcasts every week. I love to hear what Kevin says. I've heard all Yes Music podcasts every week. I love to hear what Kevin says.
So that's just about all the time I have this week. Thanks so much for listening once again. I'll be back next week, but in the meantime, please do get involved by subscribing to the podcast, leaving a comment on the blog, sending a tweet or direct message to @YesMusicPodcast on Twitter, an email to show@yesmusicpodcast.com, or finding Yes Music Podcast on Instagram. So, until next week, just remember, whatever your progressive rock question, the answer is yes.